It was supposed to be another calm, boring U.S. reconnaissance flight, until the Chinese J-16 showed up determined to prove it had absolutely no idea what the word professional means. Turns out, it also had a very flexible interpretation of minimum safe distance. At 09:23 hours, a U.S. Air Force RC-135 rivet joint was conducting a routine flight in international airspace over the South China Sea. The aircraft, built on an older transport airframe but equipped with advanced signals intelligence systems, was flying at a steady altitude while cataloging electronic emissions across the region. RC-135 missions are predictable: stable altitude, constant airspeed, and broad area electronic surveillance. The crew monitored their consoles and maintained course when radar operators detected a fast-closing contact approaching from the right quarter. A PLA Air Force J-16 multi-role fighter. Intercepts occur in this region frequently. When conducted professionally, fighters approach, identify, maintain safe separation, and depart. This intercept deviates from that standard. The J-16 accelerated, shifted to a crossing vector, and closed the distance at high relative speed. At the moment it passed directly in front of the RC-135's nose, the Chinese pilot engaged both afterburners. The result was immediate and documented on the Pentagon-released cockpit video. The heavy U.S. aircraft flew directly into the J-16's wake turbulence cone. The airframe vibrated, instrumentation shook. The crew compensated for sudden aerodynamic disturbances. Wake turbulence generated by an afterburning fighter produces rapidly moving high-energy vortices capable of inducing abrupt roll and pitch deviations. In a large aircraft with slower control response, such as the RC-135, these disturbances can momentarily degrade lift, disrupt airflow into the engines, and challenge flight stability. A reminder that professional distance in aviation isn't supposed to be measured in feet. Indo-PACOM described the maneuver as unnecessarily aggressive. Translation? A polite way of saying, please stop doing that before someone gets a new parking spot in the ocean. That assessment is significant because it reflects a violation of standard intercept protocol and a risk to flight safety. And it was not an isolated case. Over the last 3 years, multiple incidents involving PLA fighters have matched the same pattern. Close pass maneuvers, high-energy flare releases, chaff deployments, and electronic harassment targeting U.S. and allied aircrafts. OSINT analysis have plotted these incidents and found that many occur less than 40 nautical miles from major commercial air corridors, places normally reserved for routine cargo traffic, not abrupt fighter passes. Somewhere out there, a FedEx pilot is wondering why his Tuesday delivery route suddenly became an air show. In 2024, a PLA J-10 conducted another unsafe intercept against a U.S. military aircraft. During what should have been a standard monitoring pass, the J-10 released infrared countermeasure flares at close proximity. Flares burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, the thermal bloom can saturate imaging systems, damage optical sensors, and create dangerous heat signatures near air intakes. Modern jet engines rely on consistent airflow. A high-temperature flare entering the intake path can introduce thermal shock or trigger compressor stall. That's the kind of maintenance problem that ends with paperwork nobody wants to fill out. Indo-PACOM emphasized that flare deployment at close range is inconsistent with peacetime operations. The J-10 incident aligned with the maneuvers seen in the J-16 Afterburner event. High-energy actions conducted at distances that reduce reaction time and increase collision risks. 2 different units, 2 different aircraft, identical operational behavior. And if you're noticing a theme, yes, it's basically, how close can we get before the Americans raise an eyebrow? Beijing seems determined to find out. At this rate, the PLA might start handing out punch cards, 9 unsafe intercepts and the 10th one's free. But the pattern extends beyond U.S. aircraft. On October 15, 2025, at approximately 1500 hours, a Philippine Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources maritime patrol aircraft conducted a routine domain awareness mission near Scarborough Shoal. This location falls within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone under international law. The aircraft's crew detected a PLA fighter approaching at close range. Shortly after, a PLA Z-9 helicopter entered the intercept. Helicopters produce significant rotor downwash, vertical airflow that destabilizes fixed-wing aircraft flying above or near them. Instead of maintaining safe separation, the Z-9 positioned itself directly beneath the Philippine aircraft, compressing the safe maneuvering envelope and forcing continuous corrections from the upper aircraft's flight crew. During this maneuver, the Philippine crew reported laser interference. Laser dazzlers are used to disrupt optical sensors and can temporarily impair visual acuity. The crew documented visual obstruction and sensor interference consistent with directed laser illumination. Simultaneously, PLA radio operators issued repeated warnings declaring the Philippine aircraft was violating Chinese airspace, despite its position in internationally recognized waters. Philippine authorities later released video evidence confirming close fighter shadowing, helicopter positioning below the aircraft, visible laser activity, altitude compression, coordinated radio intimidation. In other words, China sent both a fighter and a helicopter to bully a patrol plane armed with nothing more than cameras and a very patient crew. It was less an intercept and more an unsolicited performance review from Beijing. This incident was not an isolated misunderstanding. It mirrored PLA intercept techniques used against U.S. aircraft, altitude manipulation, sensor interference, close-range vectoring, and pressure maneuvers designed to assert control over international airspace. The pattern extended again. Australia has documented multiple unsafe intercepts involving PLA fighters over the South China Sea. These incidents collectively represent some of the most hazardous non-combat interactions recorded in the region. In 2022, an RAAF P-8A Poseidon was intercepted by a PLA J-16 while conducting a lawful patrol. During the intercept, the J-16 dispersed flares, crossed the nose of the P-8 at close range, and released chaff directly ahead of the aircraft. Chaff consists of metallic fibers designed to confuse radar. When released in front of a jet aircraft, the material can be ingested into the engines, causing blade deformation, compressor wear, or, in high concentrations, engine failure. The P-8 flew into the chaff cloud. Australia formally protested the action, noting that engine ingestion posed a significant safety risk to both the aircrew and the aircraft. For context, engine experts estimate that even a handful of aluminum strands can cause thousands of dollars in damage. The J-16 pilot released a volume of chaff significant enough to pose a serious ingestion risk to the P-8's engines. This maneuver paralleled the RC-135 and J-10 incidents, a high-energy action executed at low separation distances, creating immediate flight hazards. In early 2025, another RAAF P-8 encountered a PLA J-16 that released flares within extremely close range. Australia lodged a diplomatic complaint, citing unacceptable proximity that threatened the safety of the aircraft. China responded with sovereignty assertions over the Paracel Islands, framing the intercept as lawful. The intercept itself, however, mirrored prior actions: close approach, countermeasure release, and altitude manipulation. The most recent incident escalated further. A PLA Su-35 conducted 2 flare volleys across the flight path of an Australian P-8 at a range intelligence assessments estimate to be under 30 meters. At such ranges, closure rates exceed 200 meters per second. The margin for error is effectively zero. Crew reports indicated the flares passed close enough to create sensor distortion and temporary visual interference. Australian officials described the maneuver as dangerous and escalatory. Australian analysts later noted the flares were so close the crew could feel the heat signature on sensors. Never a phrase you want associated with a non-combat sortie. At 30 meters, that's not an intercept. That's a bad first date with explosives. It aligned precisely with the J-16 Afterburner foul, the J-10 flare deployment, the Z-9 rotor-wash harassment, 2022 chaff injection, February 2025 flare incident. Multiple nations, multiple years, same operational behavior. Defense analysts across the United States, Australia, and the Philippines characterize these incidents as components of a gray zone strategy, operations intended to exert pressure without crossing the threshold into declared conflict. The techniques share common features: close-range intercept geometry, altitude manipulation, directed energy interference, high-temperature countermeasure deployment, crossing maneuvers at minimal separation, threats to aircraft stability and engine integrity, synchronized radio messaging, assertion of contested territorial claims. These are calibrated actions designed to impose risk on foreign aircraft while maintaining plausible deniability. But gray zone tactics work only when both sides agree to stay in the gray. China keeps trying to drag the region into charcoal black, but the strategy contains an inherent vulnerability. Close-range intercepts reduce reaction time to seconds. Wake turbulence, flare debris, chaff ingestion, rotor wash, and misjudged distance create variables that cannot be fully controlled in real time. If any aircraft miscalculates altitude, timing, or velocity, the result is immediate physical contact. Intent becomes irrelevant at that point. The consequences drive escalation. At 400 knots, a misjudgment of just 20 feet is the difference between unsafe intercept and an international incident with its own Wikipedia page, a career milestone no pilot wants. For now, the United States and its allies continue documenting each incident with cockpit footage, sensor logs, and flight telemetry. The pattern remains consistent, the tactics remain unchanged, and the distances continue to shrink. And every time a PLA fighter decides to play chicken at Mach 0.8, the region relies on nothing more than physics, professionalism, and luck, a strategy no one asked for, especially one that assumes everyone remembers their altitude. Bye for now.